How you doing, folks? It's Wardy here, and we're back at it, this time with a late-night edition of a Big Mets Update segment, as I'm currently recording this right around 10:30 p.m. Eastern. I was waiting for the non-tender deadline to come and close, and on top of it, I really just want to make sure this video still came out tonight for you guys, so please make sure to smash a like and subscribe button whenever you first chime in. Thank you so much in advance, because we have a plethora of topics to get into here, headlined by, yes, Jeff Passan of ESPN spoken recently on the New York Mets and their pursuit of Juan Soto, so we're going to get into those key remarks and why they stand out so much, and for good reason. From there, we're going to further talk about Hal Steinbrenner's latest remarks here with the Yankees in their pursuit of Soto, trying to bring back their most coveted star, not named Aaron Judge, in recent years, and how the Yankees are truly feeling the pressure in these sweepstakes. From there, we're going to get into the non-tender deadline, the players the Mets decided to part ways with, the players the Mets brought back, and a player or two that the Mets officially signed today, according to the New York Metropolitans themselves. That and more, folks, is what we're going to deep dive, so make sure to hit those buttons. Let us know your initial reactions in the comments down below. And before we get into Jeff Passan's remarks, among other things, let's hear an amazing word from our great sponsor here at BetUS that has you covered with all your sports betting needs. Head over to betus.com.pa today, folks. That way you too get a 150% bonus on your first deposit, $125 on your second and your third, up to $2,000 for all your sports betting needs, all by using Wardy's promo code YouTube150 there at betus.com.pa. And we're doing a two-leg parlay here for our latest daily bets. We're going with the New York Rangers outright for a hockey bet against the Edmonton Oilers. I know how good the Oilers are, and as a Rangers fan, a biased fan, I know that this is going to be a very tough matchup. Really curious to see how the Rangers defense does here, but I'm hammering them, and I'm pairing them with the LA Canes, led by Anze Kopitar, still being their captain for them. A two-leg parlay that's going to be $20 to win 45 out of that one, so hopefully a nice $65 turnout or so should both these teams win. Please know I'm not a sports betting expert, just a diehard fan that loves to talk about my favorite teams, favorite sports, like the New York Rangers, like hockey, and like what we have here at BetUS. Thank you guys so much again. All right, guys, let's hop back in this one, and now let's get into the latest on Mr. Jeff Passan and his remarks regarding Juan Soto. This is going to run for a minute or two, folks, so if I'm not talking, that's why, as the context leading up to what Passan has to say here, I think is important. Listen in.
I'm going to throw names of players at you, names of teams at you, and get whatever your latest intel is. On Soto, has anything changed since the last time we talked in terms of how you view how this may play out?
Well, I think that what happens in these meetings is teams get a better idea of how much money they are willing to spend. And their model spits out a number, right? And it says a 26-year-old who has 40-plus home run power and who's got the best eye since Barry Bonds in the sport, and who could bring in this much money in marketing is worth X. And I think based on the conversations that they have during those meetings, that number can change a little bit, because you have that psychological effect of, hey, I actually really like this guy and think that he's going to fit in, or maybe there's something in the meeting that he says where it's like, hey, I wonder, I have questions about him long term. And it's vice versa. It goes that way with the teams too. In these meetings, there are not just conversations about baseball. There are conversations about like the future of television rights, and conversations about the game internationally. And when you have all of these things that are being discussed, it changes the calculus on both sides. Where I'm at still is that the New York Mets presumably are going to, if not have the biggest offer, then be right there and be willing to go there.
So that was great to hear from Jeff Passan of ESPN and the latest ESPN Tonight podcast that we see here, hosted by everyone's favorite reporter, said absolutely nobody, and Mr. Buster only. I'm not here for Buster. I'm here to talk about Jeff, because Jeff is the best in the game when it comes to accurate MLB reporting each and every offseason. And when Passan goes out of his way to not only share his opinions, but strong opinions at that, they are backed by not only belief, but understanding on what he's currently hearing throughout the industry. So, having said that, Soto is very detail-oriented oriented and how these meetings have went, which we've heard with Hal Steinbrenner and the Yankees over the past couple of days, that there is a heavier point of emphasis than just the dollar amount for himself, but on the organization's future from the bottom up there, on not only how they're going to build more around him, but also when evaluating the farm and how is that going to look for the years going forward. Then getting into all the very appealing aspects when it comes to being with a big market team, the television aspect to it all, the sponsorship aspect to it all the little idiosyncrasies, small to big, and really what is going to determine Juan Soto and his potential long-term future at the major league level. Having said all of that, Steve Cohen still looks like the man to beat when it comes to being the top bidder, as Jeff just noted there. And I know this might seem like the worst, everyone's, best, worst kept secret, if you will, but there are still a lot of people out there, especially on the fan front, whether they're Yankee fans or opposing fans in general, that do not believe that the Mets are going to come out on top for Soto services, at least from the dollar amount alone. Now, listen, is there a world where the Mets can offer the most money for Juan Soto and they still don't land him? Absolutely. That is Mets fans' biggest concern, 1000%. They want to make sure they're not used like a fiddle. The Mets know that they're going to raise the price significantly for Juan Soto, especially knowing that they're not only going to battle with anybody, but it's their crosstown rivals in the Yankees, that they certainly don't want to see Soto stay in that uniform of pinstripes for the next 10 plus years, if that in fact becomes the case. So when we talk about the future of Juan Soto, as he is inevitably going to make his decision, hopefully the coming weeks, fingers crossed, it's going to come down to a lot of factors that we know, a lot of factors that Steve Cohen seems to be pretty confident about, at least for what we know in the public eye right now. It was very interesting to hear the remarks from Hal Steinbrenner, a slight nervousness, if you will, when you actually go back and hear everyone's thoughts on how Hal Steinbrenner went about that 15-minute presser after their meeting, and how there was uncertainty as to if they're going to bring back Soto or not. They obviously want to bring him, and he says, I have ears, I hear from the fans. So kind of a little testy there with Steinbrenner, and I think it really goes in hand with how maybe there is a different feel right now between the Yankees that truly they still need to sell themselves big time to Soto on everything that they are about. Mind you, this is after Juan Soto spent the past season with the Yankees having the best statistical season of his career, for that matter, that you guys know very well. I mean, Juan Soto literally had a magical run that we just saw for, the New York Yankees. Let me see if I can pull up the stats, if I have it over here or not. If I don't, no worries. There we go. Juan Soto, 41 home runs, 109 RBIs, a ridiculous 8.1 WAR when he didn't play defense, a 180 WRC plus, 80% better than the average batter in baseball. So even with all those successes, the Yankees still have an adamancy to make sure that they have their best sell job here. Furthermore, we had a second piece from John Heyman, the New York Post, come out over the past day or so, how the Yankees feel better after their initial conversation there that they had with Soto, that apparently Soto feels a little bit better about what the direction is of the organization. But there's some hurdles that they had to get through there, which I thought was very interesting. And mind you, Steinbrenner chose to make comments public. You're really wondering as to why that is, whether it has to do with leverage in favor of the Yankees, whether it has to do with just for the sake of actually letting out, not necessarily even frustration, but finally letting some thoughts out, because maybe he's fed up with hearing so much from the media and from the fan base itself, knowing how much they want to Juan Soto return. But then we find out that Steve Cohen was obviously there, and Steve did apparently speak to the media off record for a couple minutes. That was according to Deja Tozar there, who does a fantastic job covering Mets, covering Yankees through Fox Sports, that we're going to touch on in a second with her remarks. But she went on to further say to Foul Territory Network over this past day how Steve, while he did speak briefly to the media off the record, there was nothing in the public that he felt that needed to be made noted. That is either because of A, he feels very good about his positioning right now and he doesn't need to add on anything, or maybe B, it's because there isn't really anything too much to add for positive or negative reasons, and that's just that. It is interesting though, because Steve Cohen has been, without problem, a owner that has been outspoken at times, has freely spoken to the media, what has been needed throughout the course of the seasons for the Mets, and certainly in the off seasons and their player pursuits. So to hear that, the contrast between Cohen and Steinbrenner, I find fascinating as we go in hand with the latest on Jeff Passan's presumptuous belief here on the Mets being the top bidder, or being right at the top of the list for Soto and his services. Again, isn't really a surprise to hear this far from it, but it's nice and reaffirming to hear this from Jeff Passan out of all people, because when you're going to evaluate, okay, should I believe this reporter, that reporter, these guys' opinions, let alone their reports, or the other way around? For me and for a lot of people, it really starts with Jeff Passan, then Ken Rosenthal, and then you have, Mets space in general. We see it. Will Salmon does a fantastic job, depending on what it is for, even though he doesn't break news much. Anthony DeComo, Tim Healy, I mean, the list goes on from there. Michael Mayer, Mets Mirais, those guys are all trustworthy. But then it really goes down the list of John Heyman, who we know that John can definitely be fickle in what you're getting exactly at times. So when we hear John Heyman's personal opinion that, okay, I think the Mets are first to land Soto's services right now. Ken Rosenthal has publicly said that he believes that the Mets are the team to beat as well. So there are a lot of signs pointing similar in Juan Soto's favor to the Mets from the media perspective that we saw with the Dodgers and Ohtani a year ago. The major difference is, though, is that this wasn't a battle between the Yankees and the Mets at the time, whereas the Dodgers truly always were a slam dunk to land Ohtani's services. That was really never wavering when he officially became a free agent an offseason ago. So as we expand further here, before we get on to the latest moves for the Mets, because they're on a smaller level, that is not what the key focus or agenda of today's video. However, let's get into the latest remarks here furthermore from DJ Thozar, because I think they're very important to share, and it really, again, a further emphasis on what we know, but it really make it known on where things stand and the differences between Steve Cohen's point of view and the organizational point of view versus Steinbrenner and the Yankees.
This more. I mean, we're going to put it right out there. Who needs this more? Steve Cohen's ability to flex his financial muscle, and if he doesn't get Juan Soto, well, maybe he doesn't really flex this. Or is Hal saying, we've been flexing our muscle for decades?
Yeah, no, I think Hal is feeling the pressure, and I think the Yankees need it more. Steve Cohen has definitely proved that he can flex it. He's done it. He got Verlander, he got Scherzer, he signed Lindor. I mean, there's been no shortage of Steve Cohen making his presence.
Having the highest offer on the table for Kevin Gausman after you were already signing Max Scherzer because you wanted both. Throwing $300+ million at Carlos Correa. Throwing $325 on a man who never pitched in Major League Baseball and Yoshinobu Yamamoto. All these efforts, again, even for the ones that didn't go in the Mets' favor, it wasn't for a lack of effort in a lot of these heavy pursuits, showing the Mets heavy willingness to spend money when they feel it's right to spend money, the same way that they're going to go nothing short of scorched earth for Juan Soto and his services this offseason.
Known since he owned the club a few years ago now. And I think Hal Steinbrenner understands that he needs to get this done.
Sorry, ADHD ahead of me. Got to fill this in. And let's not ever forget the sweepstakes that started really the great traction on this platform. Trevor Bauer. I know that no one wants to talk about Bauer, and that's fine, but that was also a heavy pursuit where the Mets had a ridiculous AV. The Mets had a higher offer on the table, or right around there in comparison to the Dodgers, but Bauer obviously went to LA more than anything because he wanted to play for the team that he grew up idolizing in a lot of ways, being a Cali native, being from that area. So again, wasn't for a lack of effort for the Mets, but an organizational change in the fundamentals from the front office down, and the perception of the organization is what's drastically changed over the past 4 years in the Mets' favor. What has also been their favor since the start, however, has been the monetary aspect in which Cohen has been able to separate himself from the rest. All right.
He had an interesting comment about, listen, I have ears. I know what's expected of me. And I think that's not something we would have heard from him maybe early on when he first took over from his dad, George Steinbrenner, to really being the chairman of this team. I think he's putting his foot down on a free agent outside of someone like Judge. The last time we saw Hal being this upfront about a deal, at least that he needed to get done, was Judge's free agency.
So great stuff there from Deja. Appreciate her. She does an awesome job. And to kind of piggyback off of those remarks in comparison to Jeff Passan and his latest remarks from the ESPN podcast that we had just briefly touched on, when speaking on the Yankees, he reiterates something that I reiterate a lot too, and it's Steinbrenner's knowing that he is not his father and knowing that he hasn't flexed the guns at all like his father. And we've seen this continued trend where the Yankees have been willing to allow top players to part ways. Let's say, i.e., I know it was a little little bit ago, but Robinson Cano, they allowed to go for over $240 million to the Seattle Mariners when he was a star in the Bronx at the time. That honestly would have made a lot of sense to still keep him for at least a number of years, but he went elsewhere. So that is just one of many examples how the Yankees, they are always going to be focused on themselves and their perception first. That's another thing that I would like to emphasize here to really put a cap on this, and then we'll talk about the latest moves for the Mets, because when we talk about pressure, I think DJ's 1,000% right. The Mets don't have pressure the way that the Yankees do for Juan Soto services. The Mets aren't the ones that just lost the World Series to the Dodgers, where Juan Soto was one of, if not their top player, not named Giancarlo Stanton, all year long, into postseason play for that matter, and now they're doing everything to try to retain said player. There is a lot on the line for the Yankees from a narrative, a perception point of view, and this, in my opinion, I think is just as much a priority for them as it is to bring back Juan Soto. And that's an insane thing to say, and I'm really curious how Juan Soto has perceived this entire aspect, because the Yankees, as it was noted through John Heyman of the New York Post in his latest article on how that meeting went, the Yankees of course flexed and reiterated the fact that they separate themselves from any other organization in baseball, from the championship pedigree, from the aspect of the amount of eyes that they have on them, the global aspect of their fan base and everything in between. So they're constantly trying to do a sell job on how this is us, we're the New York Yankees, we're the big bad Yankees, we do this each and every time. We are set up for players like yourself to be here, and this is how things typically are. But what if that changes? What if Juan Soto decides to say, I understand that, but I also understand I'm going to get most money from Steve Cohen. And I also understand that the Mets are on the up and up and are clearly not taking steps back, but only forward. And I could be the star and the face of that organization and still be the face of New York in so many ways without being a part of the New York Yankees and being the pinstripes. Yankees, their organization, from Steinbrenner to Cashman to Boone to the fan base and everyone in between, have so much to lose should they lose Juan Soto based on the perception alone. You think Yankee fans and that entire organization wants to hear the narrative that's little brother now? Do you really think they want to go through what they went through to an extent back in '86 when the Mets won it all last, and it was finally a Mets center type town in a lot of ways, even with the great success the Yankees were still continuing to have? This is a Mets team that can not only change the narrative, but can change the perception in so many ways that, listen, yes, the Yankees have the pedigree, yes, the Yankees have been there, done that, but it doesn't mean that means everything's going to always go in their favor. That is what their heavy emphasis is here, is we are who we are, and because we are who we are, that is why you should be with us. Okay, that's great and all, but is that enough to sell on the fact that you're likely not going to give me the highest average annual value on a deal with potential opt-outs, in which I know that there was rumblings on a potential opt-out of a deal actually from a so-called report, and I say that because I'm not doing a video on this singularly because it's not an accurate report in my opinion. Marino Pepin, I'm just mentioning it because this was going around the web earlier today. Marino, who apparently is a Hispanic analyst for the Red Sox, is play-by-play for them as well, said how Juan Soto is looking for a 12 to 14-year deal at least $45 million, which is light in my opinion. He's not getting anything less than $55 million AAV in my opinion, depending on the structure of this deal, and have opt-outs after the third and fourth season. So opt-outs I expect in this contract for Soto after the third and fourth year. I don't know if it'll be back-to-back like that, but the last thing I'm going to do is also take this more than a grain of salt when Marino, who is not known for his MLB reporting whatsoever, are the same people that are buying as everything Hector Gomez says as the end-all be-all, which is why we're all still waiting a year plus later for Francisco Alvarez to have signed his extension, right? If you know, you know. But that's all I got to say on that front, everybody, on the topic of the Yankees and the Mets and their continued pursuit of Juan Soto. The pressure is on. For us fans, yes, we're dying for Juan Soto. But can the Mets go out and have continued success without Soto? Absolutely. And if what they just did this past season isn't a great example of exactly that, I don't know what is. I think the Mets have very little to lose here, only to gain, and certainly what they could gain is a superstar, a generational talent, as Jeff Passan said, the best eye since Barry Bonds and Juan Soto in Queens to pair with Francisco Lindor for the next north of a decade. Plus, I don't think there's any fan that would complain about that prospect because it's not our money, and if Steve's willing to spend it, why wouldn't you be willing to either? Also, final thing on this front, Steve Cohen has no problem spending when it feels it is deemed right to spend. The Mets are not going to be throwing this at all in Juan Soto's face, saying, listen, we understand what our organization has been, we understand what we are known for, and we're going to use these as aspects to try to reel you in. The Mets know they don't have the history in their favor, but they know that they have not only what is currently in front of them, but what is ahead big time. So when you evaluate farm, when you evaluate player development, when you evaluate front office coaching staff stability, when you evaluate the structure of a roster, an owner that's going to continue to go out and spend, there is not a stubbornness with Steve Cohen the way that there will continue to be for Steinbrenner year in and year out, to the point where he felt obligated to make a comment on Soto when he doesn't go out of his way to do that too much. You can tell that there is not only maybe a sliver of frustration, but also an added pressure there, knowing how much they need to try to get that deal done, knowing how much is at stake for not only the Yankees and their future, but also for the sake of the perception of the organization should they lose him out of all teams to the Mets. The fact that the Mets are as in as they are is what is making this that much more stressful for Steinbrenner and co. Again, doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure this out, but lo and behold, that is what we're currently dealing with. So from there, folks, let's get on to the latest moves for the Mets. As we talked about yesterday, they did sign Joey Meneses from the Washington Nationals, former first baseman / DH, and they also now brought in Jackson Reitz. Jackson Reitz, for those that don't know, is a veteran catcher who's had a cup of coffee at the major league level, including a stint this past season there with the San Francisco Giants, and nothing to look at on the offensive end. But in the AAA level, he did show out his prowess and why he will now be AAA catching depth for the Mets to consider, should say one in a Luis Torrens go down with injury, and then the Mets can at least have a rotation of guys at the AAA level that they can turn to, as I know that they already have one down there that is solid at the AAA level, and now they have themselves another. 254 average, a 368 on base percentage, a 431 slug for a 103 WRC plus, just above league average this past season at the AAA level there for the catcher. So congratulations on coming to the Mets on a minor league deal with a spring training invite, my friend. We're happy to have you. Now, the latest on the Mets, and it came to the tender deadline, folks. They have non-tendered, yes, former top prospect Alex Ramirez. Alex Ramirez was once the most coveted outfield prospect for the Mets, right around north of 3 years ago now, back when their farm was also far more depleted than what it is currently. I think that's something to make note of. Ramirez sadly didn't even make strides to show any production getting to the AAA level. He was with the Rumble Ponies for the majority, if not all, of last season, and he even lost his job in the leadoff spot throughout the course of the year to a blossoming infield prospect in Wyatt Young for the Mets. So Ramirez is gone, and we also saw Grant Hartwig, who had a little cup of coffee at times for the Mets over the past couple of years, some innings eaten. He's dealt with ailments, though. He was a great story a couple of years ago, Hartwig, going from all the way from single A to the bigs essentially in like a year and a half, which I thought was brilliant. Hartwig also went out of his normal whatever profession he was going to try to do to go into being a professional pitcher, and a lot changed in a short period of time for him. So Hartwig, I wish him the best. Alex Young, like Danny Young, two southpaws who will not be in this Mets bullpen next season, more than likely. Alex was officially opted for his non-tender contract. He had a solid little stint with the Mets, as did Danny Young, but two southpaws that certainly were not enough for what this Mets team needed throughout the course of the season in their bullpen. What they did do on the positive front, though, and who they brought back for their bullpen, is Mr. Sean Reed-Foley. And I'm a big SRF guy, and the reason why I'm a big Sean Reed-Foley guy, because I know some of you guys are going to say, Wardy, Sean Reed-Foley's watch, he's not good. Counter, he's actually solid. One, his Arsenal is elite, though. He has at least a 3-4 pitch mix, which I like a lot about him. And two, in 21 and a half innings, which 21.2, I should say, which is the most he's ever pitched in a Mets uniform. Prior to that, he hadn't pitched that much since the 2019 season at 31 innings for the Toronto Blue Jays. That's before the Mets acquired him there via trade. Since then, though, he had himself over 10 K per nine to a roughly 6 walks per nine. So walks were an issue for Sean Reed-Foley, but even with how obnoxious that walk rate was, when everyone was getting walked in the first half of the season for the Mets in their bullpen, he still posted a very strong 1.66 ERA, a 2.88 expected ERA. Sean Reed-Foley, that can be thrown in low leverage, sometimes high leverage, a multi-innings eater, not named one there that we know in Jose Budo, among others. Now he'll be competing for a bullpen spot yet again for the Mets as we enter 2025. And speaking of bullpen, Danilo Nunez, you guys remember him? Well, Danilo Nunez is thankfully making strides there as he's continuing to rehab and do well, which is great to hear. So Nunez is a man that we can hopefully see with the Mets, as soon as, I would say, let me see if I can actually pull up quick on Nunez. Give me 1 second, everybody. Let's see here from Anthony DeComo. Daniil Nunez is progressing well from a strained right flexor tendon and a PRP injection, which is great news for a player who once seen that risk of surgery. He's going to work out there that we're going to see for a team in the Dominican Winter League, and he could even make his winter ball cameo if things are going to go well. So great news regarding Daniil Nunez, because he was our little Edwin Diaz in the setup role, that nasty fastball, that slider, that 1-2 punch. He's going to be looking to potentially impact this Mets bullpen big time here as we enter 2025. So happy to hear the latest on that front. And yes, a little tidbit, Aaron Judge hasn't spoken to Juan Soto at all this offseason. Don't read anything else into it. I saw some silly remarks, people saying, oh, the Yankees are not going to be in on Soto now because Judge isn't talking to Soto. I mean, oh my goodness, how much more out of touch could you be? But I digress. Let's focus on the reality here, which is Francisco Lindor's talked to Juan Soto this offseason. We all know that Lindor's been a part of the recruitment process for the Mets to varying degrees, and I find that very interesting. I'll leave it at that. I'll let you guys interpret that at all if you want to read into it. If not, that's perfectly fine as well. And who the Mets tendered for their contracts is as follows: David Pearson, Paul Blackburn, Tyrone Taylor, Tyler McGill, Luis Torrens, and newest Met Jose Siri have all been tendered contracts without a problem for the arbitration eligible players. And that'll do it for everything that we had to break down in today's video on the latest big Mets updates here, folks. So thank you guys so much for watching. Let us know your big takeaway in the comments down below on Juan Soto, that current sweepstakes, all the latest there, on everything with the latest roster moves. And stay tuned, folks, more on the Mets, or more moves, more signings, more inevitable trades throughout the offseason, more rumblings on Soto, and everything in between we're going to cover to a T as we do each and every offseason. Thank you guys as always. Make sure you have a fantastic rest of your night, day, evening, whenever you're watching this. And this is your guy Wardy signing out. Peace out, folks.